We're watching all of this very closely is the political analyst, Professor Stephen Friedman. Professor Friedman, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. We now have, what, 1, 2, 3, is it 4 ministers in the presidency? Does that work? Is there any advantage to having so many ministers in the presidency rather than as standalone ministers?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Look, I think whether they're in the presidency or not matters less than what it is that they're supposed to do and whether what they're supposed to do is appropriate. And I think that there is a question mark here because we were told in the president's speech that there's going to be a minister for monitoring, planning and evaluation who will look at the way in which government works, and that is Marupene Ramakgopa. But now there's a second minister, Minister Chaveni, and there's no description. I'm not clear what it is that she's supposed to do. So I think that's far more of a concern than the fact that it's in the presidency. The argument for it being in the presidency is that it enables coordination. I must confess that I'm skeptical of that argument. But as I say, I'm far more concerned to discover exactly what it is that Minister Chaveni is responsible for, because we haven't been told in the President's announcement.
When he came into office, or certainly at the beginning of his first sort of formal term, President Ramaphosa said he would try and make cabinet smaller. And yet, I don't know, maybe my maths is out, but it seems to be getting bigger all the time.
Well, he acknowledged that it's getting bigger. He says it will get smaller in the long term. I do have to say, though, I'm a bit amused by this constant reference to how many people there are in the cabinet, because many of the people who criticize the cabinet for being too large would, for example, quite admire the system of government in Britain. And I did an exercise a while ago. Britain has substantially more cabinet ministers than we do. It has over 100. It becomes a question of, it's a bit of a cliche to say it's bloated. I think that if you say it's bloated, you've got to say who shouldn't be there and what ministries should be combined. As I say, I have doubts at the moment about what one minister's role is. There may be other such doubts, and I think that's important. But he has acknowledged that it's bigger. He says it's going to get smaller. But I think South Africans occasionally must be reminded that some of the things that get thrown about in our debate are very often what's handed on from one discussion to the next rather than what is actually grounded in international trends.
We know that the ANC, they must surely, I would think, be concerned about losing or going below 50% in the national election next year. And we can see this. There's been plenty of reporting on their internal polling. The fact they're doing polling tells us that they're concerned. Do you think we're beginning to see any signs of trying to stave that off? You would think the way to stave that off is to simply govern better. I don't know if that's happening.
Well, Stephen, exactly. And look, it is uppermost in their minds. If I were to sum up this cabinet reshuffle in two ways. The one which I think has been remarked by quite a few people is at least for the moment, the end of the Zuma faction, because they're virtually all gone, with a couple of exceptions. And secondly, this does seem to me designed to make sure that the ANC does govern more effectively and tries to win back the support that it's losing. And that is what this minister in the presidency is all about. It's what the electricity minister is about to a certain extent. And the belief within the senior echelons of the ANC is that if you bring in people like the two Ramakgopas, if you bring in people like Minister Chaveni, you are bringing in people who are committed to make government work better, and that they are going to whip everybody else into line and make sure that people do what is expected of them. I would have to say that I am very skeptical that it's really going to turn out that way, because we've seen this movie before. And that is that at the very beginning of our democratic dispensation, we had the RDP office in the presidency, which was supposed to make sure that everybody implemented the RDP. And it didn't work out at all, because quite frankly, when government departments hear the coordinators' feet tramping down the corridor, they tend to put up the shutters, get very defensive because they think they're being told how to do their jobs. So whether it's Minister Marupeni Ramokgopa or Minister Tribeni or both, I think they're really going to find it very difficult to get government departments to do what they want them to do.
Could there be a sense of fear by some in the ANC now? I mean, they've been in power for 30 years. Power can be quite comfortable.
Look, I think, when I'm occasionally asked, do they realize how serious it is? Yes, they do. As you pointed out in your question, their internal polling says that it's more serious than the by-election results say it is. So there's no doubt that they are very worried. There's no doubt that they know that if they don't do some dramatic things in the next year, the chances of them getting 50% in 2024 are very slim indeed. And as I say, these are some of the things they're trying to do about it. They believe that if you put somebody, or perhaps more than one person, in the presidency, who will keep on knocking people's doors and sending them emails and making sure that they do what they're expected to do, that will change. As I say, I'm skeptical. Let's see what happens. The energy minister has been the subject of a great deal of speculation, etc. But my own view, which will be denied publicly, is that really the purpose of the energy minister is to do certain things which Minister Mantashe is not prepared to do. Because we know that one of the problems in implementing government energy policy over the last couple of years has been that Minister Mantashe doesn't like that policy and that he does what he can to delay it. I think the idea is that the new minister, who is now Mr. Ramokgopa, will have the authority, if Mr. Mantashe's ministry delays things, to say, well, you can't delay it. It's government policy. You've got to do it. And, of course, the hope there is that if they can make substantial inroads into load shedding by the time the election happens, to either get rid of it entirely or more realistically to mean that it's much less of a factor in people's lives, that will have beneficial effects in the election. Because I think it's generally assumed that if the ANC goes into next year's election with load shedding at anything like the level it is at the moment, it's going to lose.
Professor Stephen Friedman, thank you very much indeed, political analyst. I really do appreciate the time.